I'm just almost there. Okay. Now we are up
Got it,
on
you got it.
YouTube.
I'm glad you're here, Joyce. I have to do it otherwise. My last year of teaching, it was 100% Zoom. And
So I don't know you.
I'm
I'm
tired of it.
Rebecca.
And I'm Kyle.
I've heard all about you.
Oh,
okay.
Hold him here while I call the police.
only the good parts are true.
Oh, well, then I haven't heard that much. No, kidding, kidding. I'm Joyce Fletcher,
David Fletcher.
and maybe it would be, I think maybe let's get started, and we can do our introductions. So, and we may have some people wandering in because we're not always right on time. Today we have with us Catherine Norquist, who's from World Relief, which is located right here in Wheaton.
Actually,
Right.
Carroll Street.
Carroll Stream, okay. And your legal, what's
I'm
your,
the Immigration Legal Services Director.
so Immigration Legal Services Director sounds like something that we all need to know something about, because we all hear about the legal issues in the complex legal issues in immigration law in this country. So it is our custom, Catherine, if you're okay, to just go around and introduce ourselves.
Sure.
And I'll just say for the benefit of the Zoom audience that today is April 16th. And this is St. Mark's and our adult formation with Catherine Norquist from World Relief. So we sort of started introductions, but
David Fletcher, please.
and David is a retired philosophy
Professor.
professor from Wheaton College. I'm Joyce Fletcher. I'm a retired counselor for College of DuPage, but I'm also working for the church now. So
I'm Brielle Norquist, and I'm my mom's daughter. I'm Catherine Norquist from World Relief. You'll hear me.
Silvia Soler, I'm the Community Outreach Specialist at World Relief.
I'm Edna Hetherington. I'm a member of St. Mark.
Kyle McCordick. We just started attending a month ago.
Yeah, and I'm Rebecca McCordick, and we actually met at Wheaton College.
Ah, great.
Yeah.
What were your majors?
I studied physics, and now I work in engineering.
And psychology.
Oh, that's great.
Well, if you'd ever taken philosophy, well, I know you did. You probably took some kind of
Yeah,
philosophy.
I took one class. of
Who'd you have though?
philosophy.
Oh, no, that's no good. No.
It was actually a much better class than I'd expected.
Yeah.
I learned a lot.
Yeah,
The people-
yeah,
it's-
yeah. She's so great.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good morning. I'm usually doing this standing up, so I might have my arms flailing around. But I'm Catherine Norquist, and I direct our Immigration Legal Services Department, which really functions like a nonprofit law firm meets legal aid. But we're part of World Relief. And I've been with World Relief for 18 years, just so you know, and I am Department of Justice accredited, and I'll explain a little bit more what that means. But World Relief, and Sylvia afterwards can tell you a lot more about what we do, but World Relief is an international organization overseas. We're in multiple different countries. We do a lot of relief and development, more development work than relief, since that's has more longer impact. But stateside, we are most well known as a refugee resettlement agency, where we are one of the 10 organizations that have a contract with the Department of State to resettle refugees into the United States. But then we also have a lot of other services that kind of wrap around both immigrants and refugees. So we don't just serve only refugees. And we're going to talk a little bit about what is a refugee. A refugee is a subset of an immigrant. And so we have a huge immigrant family services department, and we do lots of case management, career pathways, getting people who come with degrees back on a track to be doing what they were doing in their home country, employment services, senior services, children birth till even after graduation. We have an asset development department where we are doing some match savings for people to be able to buy homes and cars and start businesses, which is really exciting. We have mental health counseling and some other things as well. And then we have an education department, so we help people learn English when they come. And also we work with our employment department to do job preparedness classes, and we do citizenship tutoring. And then the immigration legal services is we help anyone who needs a consultation about their case, wants to come in and find out, do I have an immigration option, or maybe my case got messed up by someone else, and so can you help us? We take those cases, and we mainly focus on family-based immigration. We don't do anything with employment-based immigration. That's where the big money is. We don't do student visas because that goes through the universities and colleges. And we also, right now, we are not doing anything with removal defense, deportation, people being removed from the country. But we did just launch an asylum legal clinic. So we are helping people apply for asylum in the United States. I'll also break down what that means. And we're mostly focused on Afghans right now. And I'll also talk about what's going on with Afghans. And so for those of you on the screen, you can't see because of the 3 pictures on the screen, you can't see, but there's 9 kind of building or foundational blocks: housing, language, employment, transportation, community connections, health and mental health, finances, school, youth, and legal status. That really, for someone to be able to go from coming to the United States as a newcomer, to be able to go to get stable in the United States and really integrate into the United States, you've got to have all of these, really. And so that's actually, World Relief has a part in all 9 of these. And today we're really going to focus on the legal status part. But kind of backing up, it's important for us to remember, especially those of us in the church, to realize that when God made humans, he included refugees and other immigrants, that they're made in the image of God and possess inherent dignity and potential, just as all of us do. So that's one foundational block that we want to start with. And then there are so many passages that talk about God loving and caring for the vulnerable, and even lists out the orphan, the widow, and the foreigner. And he commands his people to care for the foreigner as well. And so I would love to be reading one of these, but we'll send you the PowerPoint. And I do have my Bible, but I don't want to take too much time looking through it. But I love the Deuteronomy passages. And honestly, I did this one time, and we used to have bookmarks of how many times in the Bible that it says the word is ger, which means the foreigner, and I think it's 92 times. And so the foreigner it has a real special place in God's heart. So look for that as you're reading through your Bible. Okay, there we go. And we're commanded to love our neighbors without caveats. And that's in Leviticus and Luke, and that there shouldn't be any, I'll only really love you if you can do something for me, right? So you're supposed to love without any strings attached. So let's talk a little bit. I've used the term refugee and asylum seeker, and we're going to dig into this a lot more. But a refugee is a person who has fled their country because of a well-founded fear of persecution. And these are the 5 grounds that they have to meet: race, religion, well-founded persecution or fear of persecution based on their race, religion, national origin, particular social group, or political opinion. And I want you to note, does anyone notice one thing that's missing from that group? When you think of people who are fleeing countries, what is one thing that you're not seeing there?
Poverty.
Exactly.
Or destruction of their homes and their living.
Sure. Yes. Natural disaster, right?
Well,
Like-
or war.
Or war. Exactly. Exactly. So sometimes if the war, it could follow it under national origin or particular social group. But even actually right now, those fleeing from Ukraine actually might have a hard time, because there are places where you could live in Ukraine and actually be safe. So they aren't necessarily, they've been brought into the United States in a different status, and we'll talk about that later. So an asylum seeker is someone who has entered the United States in some sort of status, maybe no status, and they actually have to meet this legal definition in front of a judge or an asylum officer. And so that it's sort of refugee after the fact is what I like to call it. So they have to then present their case in order to be granted asylum. And right now, with all of the cases that are in the pipeline, it would take 6 years to adjudicate all of the cases if we stopped receiving asylum seekers. But even as we're talking, there's asylum seekers coming in, as we know. And then globally, more than 100 million people are forcibly displaced, including refugees, asylum seekers, and more than 50 million who are internally displaced. So the issue is much larger. This is a huge amount.
What does internally displaced mean?
So like in Ukraine, Kiev was bombed. And so then a lot of people moved to Western Ukraine. They're internally displaced. So, and again, I want to preface this that we talk about this just to dispel some myths around immigrants, but we don't want to only just value immigrants for what they can do for our economy, but just to know that 44% of Fortune 500 companies were founded or co-founded by refugees or other immigrants or their children. 20 years after arrival, the average refugee adult has contributed approximately 21,000 more in taxes than they have received in governmental assistance and services at all levels. And an extensive study by the National Academies of the Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine concludes that immigration has an overall positive impact on long-run economic growth in the US. And then something that's also not on here that Matthew and I like to share is that in his book, Welcoming the Stranger, undocumented immigrants pay into Social Security about $5 to $6 billion that they will not be able to receive because they are undocumented. And then a lot of people are like, well, what about terrorists? Why are we letting so many people in? Refugees admitted through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program are already subject to the most thorough vetting of any category of visitor or immigrant to the United States. It's a 2-year process. I could break it down later. I'm not going to today. Since the Refugee Act of 1980, 0 Americans have lost their life in a terrorist attack perpetuated by a refugee.
It's a low number.
So hopefully that.
So what percentage is that?
Hopefully that helps to dispel that myth. But we are committed to be subject to governing authorities. But then I would also say the reason why we advocate for comprehensive immigration reform as an organization is because our immigration system is horribly broken and hasn't been touched since the 60s. And so the Bible also talks about advocating for when things aren't just, right? And so, Daniel and his companions in the Old Testament advocated for when things were not just. And so what we advocate is to make it harder to immigrate illegally by improving border security, which is already, they've poured billions of dollars into our border security. Make it easier to immigrate legally, adapting the US visa system to be more responsive to the needs of the US labor market and of families seeking reunification. Right now, and actually I'll talk about that a little bit later, who's actually getting employment visas. And then create an earned legalization process for immigrants in the US unlawfully who pay a fine and meet various other qualifications. I've talked to thousands of undocumented immigrants who are so willing to, I will pay whatever I need to do just so that I can gain legal status here in the United States. And then many evangelical Christians have rallied behind a version of this framed as a restitution-based immigration reform, which seeks to both honor the law and keep families together, avoiding either amnesty or mass deportation. So World Relief is not saying, let's do an amnesty, or on the other end, let's mass deport people. But we do want an immigration proposal that makes sense and comprehensive. And then talking about immigrants, just to also get some perspective, only it's actually 75% of immigrants in the US are lawfully present, including all who are admitted as refugees. So that's actually a really high number. We're not everyone is undocumented. And then among the roughly, I would actually add a couple million to this. Among the roughly 11 million immigrants who are unlawfully present in the US, nearly half entered on a temporary visa but overstayed. And only about half come from Mexico, actually. So that should just dispel some myth that everyone's coming from the Mexican border. So let's talk about the different legal statuses, and I need to work on what are some statuses that people have in the United States?
Citizen, permanent resident, temporary, like student worker.
Sure, you're going for
visa.
all. Yep. So US citizens, right? And that can
All
be
right.
either those who are born in the United States or who
naturalized.
then naturalize, and we'll talk about that naturalization. In order to naturalize, though, you have to be a lawful permanent resident. And we're going to talk about how do you become one of those, because you don't just go from nothing to US citizen. And that's many, it's usually the US citizens that I talk to that come in with their immigrant spouse or family member, and they're like, well, we just need to get them citizenship. Like, well, you have to walk through the door of lawful permanent residence first. So
Yeah, we had a neighbor who was here on a work visa from Canada. And he and his employer had some issues. And so the employer, kept threatening that he was going to call immigration and get him deported. And so that was,
which could actually be labor trafficking. So
and that was
That's not
like
good.
a big thing, we ended up calling our representative and on his behalf and,
Good.
trying to
Well, You
advocate
call
for him.
on his behalf, I call the other one.
Oh.
Just kidding.
Mixed feelings about this neighbor.
You like his wife.
Those Canadians.
all right.
But I think to your point about people think that everybody's from Mexico, I
Yes.
mean, these were here, they were here legally on his work visa.
Yes. Yes,
But-
and often people think, I mean, there's actually a whole organization for undocumented Irish
Mhm.
immigrants. So, many people think that it's just if you're brown that you're undocumented.
There are a
So
lot
we
of
have to check our
Asians.
assumptions. Yes,
Lot of Poles too.
Really?
Oh,
Oh, yeah, uh-huh,
yes, a lot of
yeah.
Polish. There's also non-immigrant visa holders. The student visa folks would fall under this category. There's a whole alphabet soup is what we call it of visas. There's all sorts of visas. There's the refugee asylee that would fall under the
Mhm.
humanitarian. There's miscellaneous temporary provisions, which I'm going to talk about more. And then there's those who are here without status. They might have started in status with them without. And then on the side is, I wanted you to show you what an actual green card is. That's in the middle there. It is actually
Oh.
green now. When I started at World Relief, it was beige. So, and then up at the top right is an immigrant visa. That's for those that are coming in lawfully to stay permanently. And on the bottom right is a temporary visa. So coming in as a tourist. So
Mm.
just wanted you to be able to see those. So when people say, well, why don't people get in line? So these are the lines that you can get into, and then we're going to talk about the chances of those lines. So family-based is you have to have a US citizen or legal permanent resident, that's USC and LPR family member, and you have to have the right family member. You just not just any family member. You have to have either a parent, a spouse, or a child that is a US citizen.
No great uncle.
No great uncles. And for US citizens, you can also have a sibling, but we're going to talk about how long it takes for siblings of US citizens to come. It's not quick. For legal permanent residents, it's either a spouse or a child. So that it's even less for legal permanent residents. There's a ton of wait times, and I'm going to tell you about those. And then there can be bars to entry. If you entered the United States on a visa, let's say, and you overstayed it for over 1 year and you leave the United States and try and come back, you leave without permission and try and come back, you're barred for 10 years. So there's also people that have to overcome bars to their entry. And then there's per country ceiling. So depending on what country you're coming from, it's going to take longer. And I'm going to show you that. Then employment based, you would think it's based on demand versus supply. It is not. And so it's purely around caps. And really those, there's a very low cap. It's only 5,000 people get the unskilled labor category. That's for hospitality and like landscaping and things like that, or migrant workers who are picking our food and things like that. More people were coming through Ellis Island in a day than that number. So you have to be in a high demand field, which is basically if you are in computer engineering, you'll get in, or in the medical field. That's where that's where the high demand fields are. And then there's per country ceilings for those too. And there's more family-based visas given per year than employment-based visas. And they open it up and it fills really quickly. So all of our employment based attorneys that volunteer with us are very busy right around April. Then there's the diversity lottery visa. So this is, it's certain countries, they give 55,000 visas per year, but you have to have high school equivalency degree or at a minimum of 2 years professional experience to do it. And you have to be able to navigate the internet and have consistent internet, right? So you got to find an internet cafe in some places and actually not get kicked off to apply through this. And then your odds of winning the lottery are basically the same odds of us winning the lottery here in the United States. So, but we have had, I've met tons of diversity lottery visa winners. And, sometimes I often ask how many times did you apply? And it can be 5 or 6, some it's 1. And I'm like, oh my God, so, yeah. And those are usually from low sending countries that those folks are from.
What are some of the low sending countries?
So I know the Democratic Republic of Congo is one, putting me on the spot, so I don't remember all of them.
That's okay.
Some of the lower sending African countries are the ones that I most have interacted with. And I'll have to think to get back to that. And then there's humanitarian provisions, certain victims of crimes, which I'm going to talk about, asylum, refugee, and humanitarian parole, which we're going to talk more about. But I want to let you know a little bit more about the family-based immigration system. So as I was saying, if you're a US citizen, you can apply for your immediate relative, which would be your unmarried minor children and parents. And they come quicker. And right now, quicker is 2 years, okay, because they're so backed up. A lot of this is they're still recovering from COVID, and then a lot of embassies have a lot of conflict in their areas. So it depends on which embassy you're coming out of. But then if you're not an immediate relative of a US citizen, there's these preference categories, and preference 1 is US citizen applying for an unmarried adult child. So a child over the age of 21, and they can't be married. So, and you have to wait for a certain amount of time, and we're going to talk about that for a minute. So in many ways, it's blocking a lot of children from getting married because they don't want to fall out of this preference 1 category. Then there's 2A is legal permanent residents can apply for spouses and minor children. And over on the right, you can see on the unlimited category for preference 1, it's 23,400 visas total, 87,000 for the 2A, 26,000 for 2B, and that's legal permanent residents applying for their unmarried adult children. And then preference 3 is US citizens applying for their married adult children, and then they can also bring their derivative children. That's only 23,000 a year. And then 4th preference is US citizens applying for brothers and sisters, and that's 65,000. So how fast is this going? So for those categories, the F1, so not the immediate relative, we already talked about that. F1, so these are the high sending countries, China, India, Mexico, and the Philippines. So if you look, Mexico, you're waiting 20 years, even though you're in this first preference category. So if I were going to be waiting 20 years to see my family member, or if they could cross the border, what am I going to do? Just putting that out there. But these other countries, they can't just cross the border, right? So China, they're waiting. And they're just now, what was interesting about this is I had this PowerPoint done for spring of 2022. And this right here under China, it was December 1st of 2014. So that's how quickly these are moving. Okay, so in 1 year, it took them to move from the 1st of December of 2014 till
The
the
15th.
15th. It took a whole year. So this is not moving, that they
Yeah.
update this once a month. This visa bulletin is what it is.
Mhm.
And these are the these are the receipt dates of when people actually sent the application in. So again, so I also want to highlight over down here for Mexico. Oh, I clicked. For Mexico F3, you're waiting 26 years. And honestly, in reality, what this turns out to with how slow it's moving is, especially in the F4 category siblings, it could take 100 years for someone to actually come. So when people say that there's chain migration, that people are coming in, they're turning around applying for family members, they're coming in by the droves, they're not. This is the wait times that they're dealing with. And remember, you have to have the right family member. So that's just some context for you on the family-based immigration system. So what are these humanitarian provisions? Talked about refugee and asylee status. T visas are victims of human trafficking, and immediate family members can benefit from the T visa. They can apply for their. So this would be both the sex trafficking industry and then also labor trafficking. So exactly what your neighbor was dealing with, I would say definitely fell into the labor trafficking category. Anyone who has been forcibly coerced, they've been given a fraudulent promise to come to the United States, will treat you well. If their documents are taken from them, they can be eligible for this visa.
This morning's broadcast of Latino USA was a particular case of fraudulent kind of kidnapping of people who thought they were going to be able to work. And
Yes.
instead were trafficked.
Yes, it's often a promise that things are going to be great, and then things go horribly awry. And it's really hard to find these folks. These folks don't just walk in our office. We usually have to have close relationships with law enforcement, which we do. And we are just going to start taking T visas. But we do take a lot of U visas, which are victims of one of 30 different crimes. So you have to have been a victim of a certain 30 different crimes. And often our department is very good at arguing this was sexual assault, or this was whatever the crime is, because of the components of the crime. And so both of these T visas and U visas, they're undocumented folks who have become a victim, and they have to get a law enforcement certification saying that they complied with law enforcement. And so thankfully in the state of Illinois, we advocated so that law enforcement has to fill out the form, because previous to a couple of years ago, so a lot of law enforcement were saying, no, we're not going to fill out that form. And so we would have to argue with police departments, like they cooperated with you, please say that they did, in order to even apply for the U visa. And both the T visa and U visa are temporary statuses that can then lead to a green card or lawful permanent residence. Violence Against Women Act is for both men and women. They're victims of abuse, but they have to have been married to a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident spouse. They have to prove the abuse, and often it's their immigration status that's keeping them. We're going to call immigration if you don't do what if you don't do what I want or what I like. And so we also help with those folks as well. So we have about 100 to 150 U visa valid cases per year. And then there's special immigrant juveniles. These are children under the age of 21 that are victims of abuse from one or both parents. And they have to have a court order that they are dependent of the court or in custody of the state And then they get this temporary status that then can lead to a green card status. We don't do those. We don't see a lot of those. It's another organization that does a lot of those. So those are some of the humanitarian provisions. And then they got even more broad when what is called humanitarian parole. And so this is where, when you heard that what happened in Afghanistan, the Taliban took over, and we went in and we evacuated 75,000 Afghans, and we brought them here and put them on military bases. And then they, through the refugee resettlement agencies like World Relief, were resettled into our communities. They were given humanitarian parole. So we expanded that. Well, what is humanitarian parole? It's a temporary status. It's given for 2 years. You get work authorization. What happens after the 2 years? Great question. That's what we're trying to figure out right now. And so you either get re-paroled, but you have to get re-paroled through the border that you came through. There's not just a form that you send to re-parole, or the government has to extend it, or you have to find another path. Now, most of the Afghans are eligible for asylum. So that's actually the cases we've been taking for asylum. So they enter legally on this humanitarian parole, and then they have to plead their asylum case. Or if they're not eligible for asylum, there's something called temporary protected status, which I'll talk about. Ukrainians, you would think that they all came in as refugees. They did not. They were given humanitarian parole. And then there's a whole parole system set up for sponsors to sponsor their Ukrainian family members or friends to come in on this humanitarian parole. What happens after the 2 years? Great question. We're still figuring that out, and we're waiting on the US government to figure this out, because a lot of the Ukrainians are not actually eligible for asylum status.
I mean, it's a hope that the plan is a hope that they would just be able to go back. Is that kind of what?
That's kind of the hope, is that, you know, in 2 years,
Everything will
2
settle.
years, everything should settle out. A lot of them do want to go back, but
Yeah.
a lot of some of them do not. So yeah, that's the tricky part. So I talked about Afghanistan, and in interest of time, these are the different statuses that many of them, we still do resettle refugees from Afghanistan, because so many of them in this SIV category, special immigrant visa, they worked with our US military and government. And that's actually a lot of the ones that got evacuated are those who were in special units working with our military. And these are just the different statuses that they've come in on. And then the Ukrainian refugee crisis, we're calling it a refugee crisis, but they weren't given, it's not advancing up there. Advanced on my slide.
Well, that's weird. Your slide.
I've never seen it do that before.
That's
You could try unsharing and sharing again.
I'll do that. There we are. Ukrainian refugee crisis. There we go. Okay, so this was just something we do this. This is only for the suburbs. We have 3 sites. We're Chicago, DuPage, which is Carroll Stream, and Aurora, which is 30 minutes east of here, or west. I always say that. And just to give you a snapshot of, we now have a whole group of Ukrainians that work for us and that are working with the Ukrainian population. But just for January to March, we saw 61 cases, which was 182 people. Aurora saw 12 cases, 25 people. And then total intakes from February 24th of 2022 till March 6th, we saw 285 cases, which was 568 people. Both Ukrainian and Russian languages. And then those are the services that we helped. And where they're finding housing is usually where their community is: Aurora, Arlington Heights, Des Plaines, Elk Grove, Palatine, Plainfield, Schaumburg, Wheeling. So we have seen quite a few Ukrainians that are coming through. Thankfully, the federal government has allowed them to be eligible for public benefits. Same thing with Afghans. That's not true of a lot of other immigrants who enter. So the Ukrainians and the Afghans have been very, very lucky in that they are eligible for the same public benefits that refugees are eligible for, meaning food stamps, meaning subsidized housing and all of these things. So they're getting sort of a leg up, if you will. Now I'm going to like whiplash us to another temporary provision that started in 2012, which is deferred action for childhood arrivals. Have some of you heard about DACA? Okay. So we serve a ton of these folks, and these are our favorite folks to work with. These were those who arrived in the US before the age of 16. They had to prove all of these applications first time were like this big. They had to prove continuous residence in the US since before June 15th of 2007. They had to be physically present and without lawful status on June 15th of 2020 or 2012. They had to have not left the US without advance parole, which is permission, on June 15th of 2012. They had to have graduated from high school or be in high school, higher ed, obtained a GED, or have served in the US Armed Forces. And they had to have not committed certain crimes, 3 or more non-traffic related misdemeanors, a significant misdemeanor, or felony. And honestly, very few. I've had a couple with a misdemeanors. I think I've seen one with a felony, and it was a juvenile. So this was an executive order under the Obama administration. The last 4 years, and actually, yeah, these last 8 years have just been kind of very brutal and very traumatic for this population because it's gotten shut down, it's gotten reopened, and honestly, we're waiting on a court case to shut it down again. So they can renew every 2 years. They get a work authorization card so they can work in the United States legally and get a social security and a driver's license. But every 2 years, they have to pay this $495 fee to renew. So that is
What is
costly.
who
That goes to immigration to process. Thankfully, one of our grantors is giving us a scholarship. So if they come to World Really can apply and renew their DACA with us, and their income is in a certain bracket, we through the state of Illinois pay the $495. So what is this temporary protected status that a lot of Ukrainians and Afghans are eligible for, and a whole slew of other countries? It's often, Liberia was one of the ones that we gave, 20 years ago, but then due to ongoing armed conflict, we did this temporary protected status, and it kind of mirrors the DACA program, but also this is open for environmental disasters such as earthquakes or hurricanes. So Haiti, a lot of Haitians were eligible for temporary protected status. So this is, again, temporary. You get work authorization for 2 years. You have to renew it every 2 years. And only if the federal government says, yes, these certain countries can renew for temporary protected status. So it can get shut down at any time. And that means you would have to return to your home country, even if you've been here 20+ years and have had US citizenship. So, and I have some things on the side. These temporary protected status, DACA, humanitarian parole are all workarounds because we don't have that comprehensive immigration reform that I talked about earlier. So let me get to who can practice immigration law, because a lot of people may know an immigrant and it's like, well, they're just forms, right? And we're smart. We went to Wheaton College and we have jobs and I pay my taxes. But if you mess up your taxes, what do? You amend them, right? No one's going to come to your house and take you and put you in court and try and remove you from the United States. So there's only certain people who should be practicing immigration law. And those are attorneys, and specifically immigration attorneys, because you wouldn't go to a foot doctor for your brain tumor, right? So same thing. There's a lot of attorneys that like to dabble in immigration. We don't refer to those. We refer to anyone who is associated with AILA, which is the American Immigration Lawyers Association. And then those organizations who are accredited or recognized by the Department of Justice, and then who have Department of Justice representatives like myself. And so it's an application that you have to be a part of a 501c3 organization. And then each person practicing has to apply for accreditation and keep it up every 3 years. And so on our staff, we have both DOJ and immigration attorneys. We do the same, we practice the same level of immigration law, and we also do the same trainings to be able for them to keep up their bar. and then for us to maintain our accreditation. So, and there's links here. If you click on this one, it takes you, it shows you all the states in the United States, and then by state, you can see in city where there are Department of Justice accredited organizations. The reason why the DOJ did this is so that immigrants would have access to affordable immigration assistance and wouldn't have to pay a private attorney. And so we do charge nominal fees, and we also get pro bono funding. So we charge far less than a private attorney. And I would say our quality is very high. We have folks that have been on our staff for over 10 years practicing and have a lot of experience. So well-meaning harm, I would say those would be those folks that are like, I can help, I can do that. You know, some of our volunteers, we have to talk to them about doing well-meaning harm. And then there's those fraudulent notaries, notarios in Spanish. In Mexico, those are actual like attorneys, but in here in the United States, people are holding themselves out as tax preparers, but then they also do a lot of immigration forms. And then we even know of a very nice woman who has the trust of a lot of the Spanish-speaking Catholic churches in Aurora. She is not accredited, Department of Justice accredited, and she's done a lot of damage, but we can't somehow convince the Spanish-speaking priest that she should not be doing what she's doing, but she's holding herself out. But she's in between fraudulent notario and well-meaning harm, because she's also charging. And there are consequences. They're often not, we don't feel that they go after those who are doing unlawful practice of immigration law as much as they should. So the accountability is not there as much, but there can be consequences and arrest and jail time connected to unlawful practice of immigration law. So then just, you know, flipping to, if you want to be more involved with World Relief, you can talk with Sylvia. Sylvia is our outreach specialist here. Our top needs with World Relief right now is serving newly arriving both refugee and Ukrainian and Afghans. We need friendship partners. That's like a 6-month commitment to kind of come alongside someone and be a friend and help someone orient to the life in the United States. We need transportation assistance. If you like being in your car and driving up, especially out here in the suburbs where public transportation isn't easy, we really need help with getting people places. The moms in the room are probably like, no, I don't want to go anywhere else. But we also need summer youth club volunteers and then ESL tutors, and both the ESL tutors can also be online. We have a variety of volunteers, but those are our top volunteer needs. And we take donations. Our biggest top donation need is dressers. So if you're going to do some spring cleaning and you want to get rid of a dresser, World Relief will come pick it up. But we also have top needs listed on our website. So that is what I have. Are there any questions? Do we have time for questions? Or that was a lot of content.
How many people different people do you work with and
How many do we serve each year?
Yes.
It's now up to until like my department serves over 3,000, and I think together we serve is 6,000 to 7,000 is where we're up to now. It's increased a lot with the Ukrainians. And then we've also gotten involved in our Chicago office. We do a lot with those that were bussed up from the southern border. So we're seeing even more. So it's a moving target.
So one of the issues I've been hearing a lot about lately is about young people who are here without a family member or something, who are working and trying to go to school, and
yeah, they would fall in that special immigrant juvenile status category,
Okay.
possibly, if they could get it. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So have you seen many of those people, or?
I mean, we see the gamut. Again, if they would qualify for the special immigrant juvenile status, if they're under 21, then we would send them to the organization that can get them that status. But if they fall outside of that, they're sort of in the shadows.
Yeah. a woman from our church started an organization, 6,000 Moms. Have you
Oh,
heard of that?
no.
And they do a lot of they do a lot with like immigrant families or refugee families to help them get settled and help them find places and one of the people who's been very involved in that organization teaches ESL. And so he has had several students who were really good students, and then all of a sudden they're not in school, and he finds out that they're working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, and they're just too exhausted.
Yep.
And
Yes.
they're just trying to
They're just
survive.
trying to survive. Yes.
Yeah.
Very hardworking, which is again, I would go back to why we need comprehensive immigration
Yeah.
reform to allow those folks to get legal status so that they're paid the wages that they should be paid. So
Yeah,
they're not having to work 2 to 3 jobs.
yeah.
How is your organization funded?
A variety of sources. We get
Right.
public funding, we get federal funding, especially for the refugee resettlement program.
But I mean,
We-
I belong to a group that donates money
Yes,
and
and we need
they always
private
ask that
funding.
question, but it can only be used for DuPage County people.
Yeah, that's okay. We
So
have a.
how would I describe the funding for DuPage County?
Yeah, so our DuPage office, the Carroll Stream office,
Right.
we are resettling refugees, we're helping immigrants. A lot of where we need private funding is to bolster, because a lot of our federal funding and state funding has time limits to it. And so when immigrants are really struggling or having extra just challenges, that's where we need our private funding to come in. You know, so let's say they need Uber to drive them to their job. They don't have a car yet. We really need car donations. We're really low on car donations. If someone is having a hard time paying their rent, that's where private funding comes in. And then paying for staff, not all staff are fully funded through grants and things. And so paying for the staff that are assisting our folks. So yeah, we can definitely, I will make sure that I give you have a card.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Okay.
She'll give you a card and we can
Yes,
talk with,
they can put her in contact with you or.
yes, that would be great.
I've talked to Susan Sperry.
Yes, she's our
Yeah.
executive director. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
She's been, there's somebody in the group that's negative towards road relief, and I don't know why.
Oh, okay.
When I brought it up. and I-
Oh, okay. That's too
Can you
bad.
Think of any, have you heard? Mm,
Are there people who think that it's too evangelical? Is that the?
I wish I knew, then I could talk about it.
Yeah.
I also have different flyers here to show you from different parts of world relief, different services. This is for our farmers.
Yeah, I think a common, thank you, Sylvia.
You can contact me. I'm gonna put you in contact with someone that would explain to
Okay.
you everything about donations and what we do about.
Yeah, I need pamphlets and you
Yeah.
know, something to put in your hands. and-
Okay, well, Sylvia can get you more of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you.
I know that there are some folks, you know, we bring these refugees here and then it seems like you just leave them, you know, and
Yeah,
that's, I would say that's a big myth. Because we stay with our refugees far beyond what the funding is really only for 90 days. And we stay with our refugees for 3 years. But there's also, there can be, if refugees are unhappy with some of if they're not complying with some of the employment requirements, maybe they don't like the job that they got into because they feel like it's beneath them, then they will go to other organizations and say, well, really, it's not helping me. You know, so there can be, and we say, and we will put them on probation, like, we're only gonna help you if you stay at this job for at least 6 months, you know, because that ruins our relationship with employers if we get them a job and then they quit after a day or two. So there can be certain different things, or they don't like the apartment that we set them up with, but it's a housing crisis right now. That would be the other area where private funding is going. Housing is really,
Oh.
it's really hard to find in DuPage County. And so we're going with the best that we can. Most of the furniture that we get is donated, but we do have standards. We're not putting trashy furniture in. And a lot of the welcome kits that we need people to donate our new items. And we buy all of the beds. We don't take used
I
mattresses.
know some collaborations in chat that get for IKEA some kits and all the volunteers put, all together the furniture that was donated for this apartment.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
cool.
It was a nice,
Yeah.
interesting.
And then we are the humanitarian arm of the National Association of Evangelicals, if that's an issue. But we have a variety of folks on our staff, including Muslim folks, Catholic. I would say we're very ecumenical in our staff makeup, and we don't only serve those who are Christian, we serve everyone. We can't discriminate on who we serve.
Yeah, and at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about kind of the biblical motivation
Yes.
for caring for refugees and immigrants. I guess maybe one question is there a,
Do we proselytize?
yes,
No, we do not, and we cannot. And
okay,
so, yeah. I would say where someone is maybe, they believe in Jesus too, that we might pray with them, if they want that. But we are not allowed to proselytize. We do connect people with churches. And so
Mhm.
that's a fine line we have to walk with churches and volunteers to make sure that they're not, that their health isn't connected to, you have to come to church with me type thing. So we keep we have a whole cohort of volunteer coordinators that kind of keep an eye on that. So yeah, no, and especially in our legal department, that's, there's a power differential, and that's one thing we're constantly trying to
right,
tell our staff, there's a power differential, and you can't use your faith to manipulate someone.
yeah.
Quick question about DACA. For the folks who had DACA, they're eligible to reapply, but is there a date or an age where, like,
They were too old.
yeah, they were too old? or they
Yeah,
were
at that
too-
time,
Like now there's 15-year-olds who fit all of the thing, but they can't.
right,
So there's
because
a
of the,
window of 15 to like what age where they're ineligible? What would you say that? Is there a date or? an
it
age?
was up to the age of 31.
No, I guess what I mean is because of the way that the court dates were played out, would it be possible to say like right now, those who never received DACA originally because they weren't eligible when they became of age are currently like 23 years old. So like between 15 and 23 or something, there's this large chunk of folks who
Yeah.
never were able to apply
Right,
and they're just sort of stuck.
right,
Their older peers have access.
Yep.
And theoretically, they would have too if the law had been on.
if the court case
If the
hadn't
court
come and
case-
shut it down.
Right.
Which
so-
85,000, when it opened up for a short period of time,
Right,
and
okay.
we had 30 people that we helped apply for the
Mhm.
initial, and the court case then shut it.
Mhm.
And so those are all just sitting in immigration,
Mhm.
hoping that they'll so yes, there is a whole, I haven't done them on,
So do you know what that age or date or?
I
is there a
I don't
general
know.
way
Yeah,
of saying,
there's
over
got
this
thousands of
age?
them, yeah.
Jamie, for people who don't know who you are, could you explain why you have such a profound interest in DACA?
Sure. So I'm Jamie. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit organization here in DuPage County called CRAO.
Okay,
So we work with high school students
Great.
and their families who, face language barriers and, some of these other kinds of barriers. like
yeah,
legal status.
right,
I've done kind of what you're doing in the past in situations like this. It's been a while, so I'm going to come and brush up a little bit. That was a question I was.
yeah,
Maybe there's a.
Yeah.
There's sort of a.
We have a
number
lot
and
of
age
folks.
Level that
yep,
on one side or the other, I might okay.
Yeah, we've talked with many that we have to say, I'm sorry, you're not in that window, and we hope that it'll reopen again.
It's so arbitrary,
It is, it is, and the court cases.
goes back and forth.
Yeah.
That's so, just can't even imagine being,
Well, and then the
Yeah,
Supreme
that-
Court, too, has not been super helpful.
no. Mhm. Right.
Perhaps you already mentioned it, but if you're looking at that 15 to 23 age group, how many people would that be who are kind of in limbo at this point?
Right, that's what I don't know, that number of how many,
We don't have an estimate.
that's quite a few.
Yeah.
So you mentioned like the dire need for sweeping immigration reforms. Is there anything in the works, or is that just another mire right now?
I mean, we are constantly trying to advocate for it. There's nothing that's on the docket, I don't think.
There was a DREAM Act that was reintroduced.
That's the one that keep,
Right.
Dick Durbin is super good.
Yeah.
Love Dick Durbin. He always puts up the Dream Act, and so that's the one that we're hoping at least could get through, but since I've been in this for 18 years, my hopes have been definitely dashed. So I'm a little jaded. I'm like, yeah, hopefully, but
Yeah.
it's really hard. We do DACA renewal application clinics once a month, and talking with these folks who've just been traumatized through this, and is there any way? Thankfully, we have helped multiple ones. Either we've caught that they've been a victim of a violent crime, so they've been able to get the U visa, or they got married. A horrible joke is, because we're sick and traumatized, is the worse your life is, the better it is for your
Yeah.
immigration status.
Right.
So some that have gotten married to US citizens and been able to travel out on advanced parole and come back in with a legal entry, then they can get their green card. Or married a US citizen, and we help them come out. So we have helped quite a few that way. But not the majority. And that's the heartbreaking conversation, is there is no permanent path, and we have no idea what they will do, and at any point this could end. And a lot of them are making more than I'm making. They're in great jobs, they're gone to school.
Yeah, I know there's kind of this myth that immigrants do not contribute to our society, that instead they're a drain on this society,
And this population has definitely blown that myth away.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they call the great replacement theory in the MAGA word, but it's nonsense.
Yeah.
Well, even if the introduction of the Dreamer Act passes the House, right? Is there any chance it will pass the Senate?
That's what's the majority in the Senate, right? That's the tricky part.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, all you have to do is have Joe Manchin sit out.
We need them to be taught.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Getting together.
Yeah.
That's the hard part. They can't
Yeah,
do anything.
so polarized
Yes.
currently, yeah.
I don't
And
think I
and
talked
I
about
and
our-
I think that, there's so many myths, damaging myths about immigrants and refugees that like, we were at a church in Florida and talking to some people who seemed intelligent and reasonable, but they're like,
Right.
well, they're both like, well, my grandfather came in, and went through the process. Why can't these people? I'm like, it's
Different
like,
laws.
it's not the same.
Exactly.
There's no process.
There's no
don't have-
line.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's a big thing for a lot of people. They,
Yes.
they, it's like my grandma or my parent
Right.
came in and things,
Right.
was
Right.
fine.
And
So
Ellis Island
why
was
aren't-
only
yeah.
open for a certain amount of time.
Yeah,
so
and
not
why aren't
everyone
these-
was even eligible for that.
Yeah, and why aren't these people just going through, they're too lazy to go through the process.
Yeah.
I'm like,
No.
But
There
so
isn't.
it's like there's just an abundance of
Well, I think it's just-
misinformation.
I think it's a smokescreen.
Yeah.
I think it's a smokescreen.
Mhm.
They're not saying what they really think.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. I also didn't let you know that we also help monthly people apply for their US citizenship. So we have that happening as well. So if you know of any immigrants that have their green card for 5 years and want to apply for citizenship, please refer them to us.
We have a friend who just got married to a woman who in France, and she's still in France because she doesn't want to, because if she comes here, she's not allowed to work.
She can't get the work visa.
No, I mean, if he applies for her and they do the consular process, she would enter in as a
Well,
green card holder.
Well, I think so they're waiting for that
But it's
process,
Yeah.
The
and they've
waiting,
been married for a year.
it's the waiting.
And so they're waiting for that process.
she
So
could-
their
She could
file
ent-
is
she could
there.
enter as a French citizen because they don't need visas to enter, but she would be from a tourist visa and you can't work on a tourist visa. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's waiting
And
process.
yes. So, he goes to France, they meet in Canada,
Yeah.
but it's just.
Yeah.
That's
That's how it is.
Yeah.
That's how it is. And
Yeah.
if we value family,
Mhm.
look what we're doing.
Yeah, right.
Well, thank you so much for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
I have some flyers if you want to get more information, because also for naturalization, we have a scholarship that cover the $725, that is the application cost. And a lot of program that we have for young people that have the work, the permit to work. A lot of program that we have for all our immigrant community, okay? My card, if someone needs to get in contact with any department there.
Thank you.
Thank you. And starting next week, we're doing a 6-week series on the Episcopal curriculum of Sacred Ground. It's not going to be as in-depth as that curriculum is, because to really do that curriculum,
University for a year.
it would take years, right? Yeah, I mean, it's like multiple credit courses that are like in a 13-week series, and we're going to do it in 6 weeks. So we're really just scratching the surface. Next week's going to be kind of an introduction to the curriculum. And then the week after that, I just wanted to mention, because so many people were here a few weeks ago when Dr. Theo Darden from College of DuPage was here, and people loved hearing him. And he's going to be coming back talking about the history of whiteness on April 30th. So I think I tell people to come. I think that it will be really worthwhile.
He was excellent.
I know. Well,
I could listen to him for hours.
well, that session was, I think, scheduled to be an hour. It went 2 hours, and everybody was like, "What? We're stopping?" You know. So, and I told him, he's a friend of mine. I'm like, so we're kind of limited, but because the bishop is visiting that day, and we're having an 11 o'clock service, I told him he can probably go till 10:30. And I checked that with George, so that may be a little bit longer than usual session because of the way that happens to fall. So, but thank you again so much. It was really wonderful having you
I
here.
hope it was a lot of content, so.
Yeah, I know.
Coming back our flyers, I have some cards for the people that have no status to know their rights, and they could also put some information in the wallet to get into some trouble and they get nervous, they have the card. Then if you want, few of them for the people that that have no status, they are more.
That would be really helpful. I don't know if you
Yeah,
all
I
know,
know.
but we have a 1
I could-
o'clock
I could-
Spanish
I could-
language
I could
service,
give it
and we
to
have a
you.
lot of.
The